Bookaholics is a safe place for reading junkies who obsess over books, authors, bookstores, book news, and book trivia. We'll nerd out with book reviews, author interviews, our habit, and other bookish things. Here is your host, Deirdre Pippins.
Hello, Kelley. Welcome to the Bookaholic podcast.
Hi, Deirdre. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, love having new guests all the time. Well, let's go ahead and dive right into it. First, I want to hear about your writer's journey before we discuss your books. Tell me how you got to be a published author.
Sure. I think like something that's probably common among authors is, just a love of reading in words from, the second I learned how to read and how to kind of just escape into the bindings of a book. But I really thought writers had to be some kind of just incredible genius, somebody really special who's lived like an outrageous or outstanding life. And so I thought for me, I would always be a reader and just jot things down kind of for myself in secret. So I just never considered writing as a career, but I would throw myself in the way of writing, whether it was in school or in college. I decided to, I would major in English, but I'd also have to add a poli-sci major to somehow make that, bankable or responsible.
Yeah.
In my own mind. And then I worked on Capitol Hill right out of college. I was a press secretary for a member of Congress from my home state of Nebraska. And I didn't realize then that when I was working on writing in the voice of, he was a 70-year-old man and I was a 22-year-old woman, that I was sort of my first kind of fictional training, like trying on a voice, trying on speech patterns and thinking about what word would he use, not what word would I use. And then I worked some in corporate America, always in some kind of communications-based role. And always just writing for myself kind of on the side and in my spare time. And I traveled a lot for work. I worked for a railroad, so I had a lot of like quiet hotel time to just scribble away. And I thought that was always something I would just do because I loved it. And then when I was 27, I had my first child and I had my second daughter when I was 30. And I really had to confront with what do I want to be doing with the professional part of my life while also raising kids. And I figured what a risk, what a perfect time to try to lean in maybe to my writing and see if I could actually do something with it. And I joined an incredible organization in my hometown now of Norfolk, Virginia, the Muse Writers Center. An incredible literary center that we are so fortunate to have. Yeah. I started taking an intro to fiction class with some people who have become, that was 12 or 13 years ago, some very good friends. Half of them are my beta readers now still. And it was like a gateway drug for me back into really writing. And so I took class after class, fiction, nonfiction, personal essay, memoir. And I realized I loved learning the craft of it as much as I loved trying to create. So after a few years of taking some workshops with the Muse, I decided to get my MFA. I did a long distance, a low residency program, which, MFAs are certainly, for me, it was a gift. It was a gift of time. And the low residency format worked beautifully for me because I had to do my writing inside my life. I wasn't taking a year or 2 years off to kind of be on a campus and study. I had to, because what I wanted to do was really make this the work of my life. So I went to Goddard College in Vermont. And after I completed that, I really leaned into teaching creative writing because, again, that unlocking of craft is just so much dorky, good fun, I think, and helping other people realize like some of their creative capabilities is really awesome. And before I went to Goddard, I wrote I call it my practice novel. It sits in a box. It'll stay in that box forever. It's moved like 3 different houses with me, just to flex that muscle and to see if I had the discipline to write a complete draft, beginning, middle, and end. And then Goddard's fiction requirement was a new novel draft in the course of the program. And so my capstone project, my thesis, was the very earliest draft of my first published book, The Unprotected. And it was just, it was from that first night of that fiction studio in, probably 2007. It was just like a light, was back on in my life. Writing and being in a community of writers and teaching has been such a gift too, because everybody who's at a writer's center, they're just there because they want to be. They're carving time, out of their lives and to devote time to get back into writing or to learn how to write even better in the way that they want to be working. And so it's incredible accountability and just a vibrant community that understands this weird, solitary thing that we do.
Exactly. Well, there's a lot to unpack in what you were just speaking on. I gather that maybe you were feeling a little bit of imposter syndrome throughout that journey when you added on that poli-sci major to what you termed as make it more bankable as a writer, because earlier on, society made writing seem like, this is a thing, you're going to be very broke and you're going to be in solitary confinement of your own doing and, writing a book and all of these type of things. I like to reference, and I've referenced on a lot of my podcasts, there's this movie of Elizabeth Taylor, and she's living in Paris and her husband is writing a book, and at portions of the movie, he's typing away on the typewriter. He's ripping pages out, throwing them in the fire. And I think he threw a whole first manuscript in the fire. And this is an old movie. It's like 1940 or 50 or so. And, there's no copy. There's no second, there's no backup copy of the manuscript. And so, that segment of the movie makes people really hard on published writers, the rejections, and people took the rejections so deeply and all of these things. But I like to think once you get past the imposter syndrome, it is a little bit more supportive and easier to write now because more people are accepting, society's more accepting of writers and people publishing something that means something to them. And there's also the dynamics of the resources that are now available to people to write. Is that something you can agree to or not?
Oh, I think absolutely. I think so many people, women, I think in particular, and creatives very much so. We are imposter syndrome and our own self-doubt about our creative worth, honestly, I think is the most terrifying and probably complete gatekeeper out there. People talk about the gatekeepers in publishing or how do we get our work in the world, but you probably know this too, the number of people who know they want to write or they know they have a book in them or something, but just can't sit down at the page simply because they have all that awful chatter in their head about who do I think I am to be doing this? Who would want to read this? And those things stop you before you start. And that to me is, there's no critic or agent or reviewer, I don't think, that could ever be as hard on your own work as you are, especially, when you're starting and when you're able to be in a community, like you said, of folks who've all been through that process.
Yes.
It is, community to me is key in everything, right? Like, I think the scariest thing in the world is really feeling like you're alone,
right?
In something good or bad. And then when you realize, oh wait, like I'm not as special or, as tortured or whatever as maybe I thought I was, then you can set that aside and really and get to work. And I think sometimes we get so hung up, and it's easy to say, since you have a couple of books in the world or whatever, but this worry about publication and who's going to read it and who's going to see it, that cart gets pushed so far before the horse that can also be limiting too, because you're worried about, I don't know, what are my kids going to think if they read this? What's my mom going to think if she reads it? All those things. It's like, you don't have to worry about that until you're 7 revisions down the road and hundreds of thousands of words, in the bank. So I think imposter syndrome is a big deal.
I really think it is too. Now, so let me take just a quick sidebar. The Writers Center, you said it's located in Norfolk, Virginia, and that's a physical place. Do they have classes online?
Thank you for asking. Yes. So the Muse Writers Center is physically located in Norfolk, Virginia. Yes, we have classes. We have online classes. We have hybrid classes. So we have teachers, we have students now from around the world. It's really been incredible what the adaptations of the last couple of years have both forced us to learn, but also how big it has made the reach of this literary center. I had no idea when I moved to this area almost 20 years ago that this creative heartbeat was just forming in the shape of the Muse, and it has been an absolute gift, not just to me, but to I think this whole area. And now it is so gratifying to see people getting involved with it from all over the world. I had a student from Tokyo, and she was willing to sacrifice her sleep to be part of this, really incredible group of writers. And she was participating in writing groups in Japan as well as some in Europe, and it was all things made available during the pandemic when everybody had to go remote and then learn how to teach in, I think, this hybrid setting, which I think is going to be with us, for a very long time.
Well, that sounds wonderful. We'll certainly have information to that here in the podcast show notes, as well as the description box on YouTube. Now, so let's get into your writing. Now, The Unprotected was your first book, and The Unprotected delves into a lot of issues that are relevant to our society today. I believe it is hints on PTSD, trauma. Go ahead and tell us a little bit about this book, The Unprotected.
Sure. I really am fascinated by the kind of complications of motherhood in our society, the intersections of motherhood and mental health. And while we're finally talking more about those issues now, I still think we have a ways to go. The Unprotected, published in 2017, it deals with a mother who just turns herself and her life inside out to become pregnant. And she finally gets exactly what she thinks she wants, but this child and this life becomes at such an incredible cost to her. And it's, watching Laura James as the protagonist, who is she's a difficult lady. She's a difficult woman to like sometimes, but just being so reduced to her, this most primal part of herself. And I think there are a handful of life experiences that really reduce humans to that primal self. And I think motherhood is often that crucible that helps you find or forces you to find who you are at your essence. And so The Unprotected it's a psychological thriller in the sense that we're really trying to figure out, what is real, what is unreal in Laura's mind as she deals with the immediate postpartum months of her child's life.
Yes. I thought that was very fascinating when I read that information because, of course, motherhood is a keystone to, of course, society, but in, latest news and information, it's been put on the forefront about how we handle motherhood and women's bodies and these types of things. And I've known people who've gone through IVF procedures. I read stories and you see entertainment stories of celebrities who do surrogacy, and they're not even possibly having any problems to do surrogacy. They just do surrogacy just because they want to keep their movie star bodies. It's a lot in all of these things. And you often wonder, I was blessed to have 2 children naturally of my own, no complications. But, other people do desire to have children, and then if you talk to older people who may be reading the Bible and say, well, every woman is not meant to have a child because some women are barren, and that's something that the ancient part of the Bible before, I'll say Old Testament, would talk about women being barren. You got all kinds of opinions coming into this whole thing about motherhood and all of these things. And I have wondered myself, people that have the IVF procedures and they finally have a baby, and that's a tough journey, so I've heard. Then you have a baby, then what? Is it really a joyous occasion? I mean, or does it turn out like your protagonist?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like you said, I think you hit it, that motherhood it's like the most commented on experience and like judged by the outside. A lot of things, and we treat it in one sense as such a banal thing that women have been having babies for eons, but then it's also the second a child does something wrong, it's like, well, look at its mother or whatever. But this happened, and I was very lucky too. I joked that in my early 20s I could get pregnant by mood lighting, and so when I was researching this book, I was just thinking about, when I got into this character, what it would be like when you work so hard, and we are, this kind of our modern selves, like we're hard charging on all these fronts. We can be career women, we can be all of these things, and we're so successful. And then this one thing that we think our bodies should just naturally be able to do, both to conceive kids and then to just naturally know somehow how to mother them, right? Which seems insane once we say it that way.
Right.
Couldn't do. And so you work so hard, you put your body through just this emotional and physical ringer and these ups and downs and these hopes. And then to experience what a lot of women experience, and then I think Laura's experience is definitely on the heaviest on some of the postpartum, the perinatal mood and anxiety disorder spectrum, this crushing devastation when the reality of new motherhood doesn't line up with your expectations, and the expectations that a lot of people are still sold or convinced, are the case. So I was excited to have that part of the conversation. I could never have imagined when I was writing it that we would be in this like quasi post-Roe world all of a sudden. And I remember talking to my grandmother before she passed. She had 8 children, and it was in the 40s and 50s. And she was talking about feeling out of control over your body, and that Laura feels out of control of her body because she can't make it to do what she wants it to do. And my grandmother was saying, growing up very poor and very rurally and being pregnant almost every year for a decade. Yeah. That complete lack of control over your fertility is it's a very difficult thing.
Wow. That was, first of all, you were very blessed to have that type of conversation with your grandmother. You possibly don't know how blessed you really are, because a lot of people from that type of generation are very closed-mouthed about trauma or about their opinions, especially women, about their opinions and things. They just kind of went along and did what they thought society would want them to do. But that was a very honest opinion from your grandmother. And it makes you think about women that you've heard about having 13 children, how they must have felt. It would be very interesting to almost go back, and if you could find women that had multiple children that did not feel like they had agency over their own body. And that'd be a very interesting topic, very interesting to see, because this is your book brings about a lot more than just her fictional story. I mean, I'm sure there's people out there that feel the same as your protagonist.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I was overwhelmed when The Unprotected came out. And then also with my newest novel, you hope that we talk about fiction being the lie that tells the truth, right? a story really does resonate with people who have lived some of these experiences. I mean, it's the most incredible and overwhelming and kind of heartbreaking thing because, it breaks your heart to think somebody had to live through this. It's hard enough to write it and to imagine it, let alone to have walked that walk.
Yes, most definitely. Well, let me ask you this, Kelley. You said it was published in 2017. Was it self-published or do you have a publisher?
No, it was Skyhorse Publishing.
Okay. Now, with your publisher, is there maybe a reissue date, a second edition, or?
It's still very much in print. I have a copy of it right here. There's one behind me. It's in hardback.
Yes.
Came out, so it is still out and available in the world. And yeah, it was a really wild time for Skyhorse and for my all kinds of things imploded the year that this book came out. So it was a wild first publication experience, but no, it's exceeded my expectations. I think it exceeded the publisher's expectations. So it's been great. It's still out there.
I would love to see it more back out on the scene, maybe brought back out just because it is a timely topic. So I would love for more people to be able to access that book and that whole story. And certainly, hopefully, my podcast will do a little bit of that, but I really think it needs to be on a broader scale, a larger scale for people to access this book even more so, because it's very timely and it sounds very, very interesting. I can almost see maybe even a movie or a short series of such a book. It really sounds very interesting. Now let's continue on with what you have up next. Your next book, and I want to make sure I'm gonna let you tell the title of it because I want to make sure I have the right. I want to find the right words here.
So my newest book came out in May of this year. It's titled Breach.
Okay, I wanted to make sure because I was like, did I leave off some words? Okay, Breach.
No, it's a short one title, and it is a complete departure from the Unprotected, totally different characters. However, there is definitely motherhood and the challenges, but in a very different way is a driving issue in this book. Breach is the story of a young, it's set in half in Norfolk, Virginia, and then half in Western Nebraska, but a young Norfolk native who marries an explosive ordnance disposal technician, an EOD tech in the Navy. And it explores their incendiary relationship, and it asks the question of, what happens when two people risk everything on one another and on love in an attempt to change the trajectory of their lives. And how does this, young mother keep the promises she's made to herself, to her husband, and the boys that they're raising? It deals with PTSD. The EOD folks, they are their own special forces and they deploy. There are explosive ordnance disposal technicians that are Navy, and that's my character Jason. Breach is Navy man, but there are EOD people in the Army, EOD, and they deploy with all different services. And so these folks are out there putting themselves on the line, in ranges of service that they couldn't have even considered possibly when they enlisted, and are the technology that the robots they use for working to defuse some of the IEDs and other bombs are so advanced now, and the heavy suits that they wear are so advanced that more and more EOD folks they're coming home alive, but they're coming home with these injuries that are not apparent necessarily on the outside, but that are profound. And I was really interested in the effect of that on a spouse and on children inside that relationship. And so that's what drove me to write Breach.
Yes. And wasn't there a movie sort of like that?
It's The Hurt Locker?
Yes, The Hurt Locker. Yes. Wow, yeah. And when you're not in the forces, the armed forces, and you're going about your day to day, you don't even think about those type of things. You just don't. and then these folks, veterans, come home, and in the hurt locker, the person couldn't even function at the grocery store.
Well, and there's a scene, because as I did a lot of research, the chaos of everyday life back in America is very often a significant trigger for folks who've literally been out. I mean, a lot of folks have some kind of traumatic brain injury, repeated concussions, CTE, all kinds of things, but inside their suits that you can sort of pretend for a minute didn't happen, right? Because you can feel the impact, you feel it happen, but then all of a sudden you're like, okay, I'm feeling better now. So you're not necessarily getting it evaluated. You're not taking yourself out of rotation and duty.
Right.
And, trying to picture somebody who is literally trying to save like a bridge or a market, and all of these innocent people, then they're trying to deal with like a line at a Starbucks when somebody's trying to order a complicated beverage, or they get unhappy about this, or there's all of these choices, in a supermarket, and all this that is a very common, unfortunately, like kind of trigger, and a really difficult place to be after there, you have this order and this purpose and this intensity, that suddenly you're back here, and we've all been living this certainly more comfortable than somebody who's been deployed in harm's way, comfortable lives. And those have all continued on while those folks were gone and deployed. And so, it's, and living in Virginia Beach now, I mean, we have branches of all the military. It's the largest naval station in the world. And so it's something that we're very used to, in the military community, but it was totally foreign to me before I moved here.
Yes, most definitely. Well, I noticed that, and not to get off of that subject, but I noticed that you have, in this book, it takes place in Nebraska and in Norfolk, Virginia, which are places that you're very familiar with. Now, when I've talked to lots of different authors, I've talked to authors who write about their stories take place in places around the world that they've never been to. What's your comfortability? Do you see yourself in writing a book eventually that may take place somewhere that you are not familiar with? Is that a barrier for you?
So the book I'm working on now is not set anywhere that I have lived or really ever visited, but it's not super far outside my comfort zone. It's set in coastal lowland South Carolina. Place is really important for me in a book. And I have absolute mad respect for historical fiction writers who can not only take me to another place, but another time. And I love to read that so much. I love when setting is really a character in a book. And so I think I am really inspired by place. And I had the hardest time getting a hold on Jace's character, my character who's from Nebraska, until I was on an artist residency in this far, far western corner of the state of Nebraska, which is where I was born, but I'd never been to this part of the state. And it was such an incredible landscape. And it actually is very similar in terms of steps and plateaus and this unbelievable driving wind to Afghanistan, where Jace would have been deployed. Having that time in that space was really what made that connection. I had no idea that part of it was going to actually be out there, or that this kid would be from there. And so it's just funny how that unfolds. But I don't know that I don't think I could write something in outer space. Like, I don't know that my imagination, I couldn't write a good sci-fi story. But I love digging into the details of place.
Well, thank you for that, because, I have talked to writers in a series that I have called the Writers Workshop. We explore these different topics because everybody is so different. And for every author that I have interviewed, they all have different answers. Every single one of them have different answers to these methodical questions that I ask about the writing process and character development and all these different things. But everybody has a totally different story about how they come about their stories. And I've noticed that, Kelley, you dive deep. It seems like in your book. I mean, you really combat a lot of serious issues that are very sensitive, that a lot of writers shy away from. They write more maybe lofty, fantastical type of books. Not saying that those are not difficult, but to breach topics such as PTSD, homelessness, motherhood, IVF, and trauma, and all of these things. What made you want to go down that path? And is your other book going to be centered on these type of things?
I never understood, books that to me didn't feel like they were centered in character and in the human struggle. And I feel like humanity, we can be both incredibly like beautiful and wonderful, but we are gritty. We are torn cuticles. We are our skin to knees in a lot of ways. And so for me, getting at the heart of why we behave the way we do to one another, especially to the people that we love, and the fact that we can so often end up hurting the people that we care about the most because of the things that have happened to us. I feel like I always hesitate saying that anything could be like universal in writing, but there are, we fling our emotional baggage at each other constantly. And so I think seeing that on the pages is interesting to me. I mean, if we didn't have any secrets, if we didn't have anything, Jace wants to hide a lot of things from Marley, and then Marley is later trying to hide the fact that she and her family are, not housed. Secrets drive us to do interesting things. Yeah. And, we don't have secrets if we don't have shame, if we don't have all of these things. And so I really love looking at that. And then, yes, my next book is more of a straight up thriller, but it very much looks at, again, kind of the effect that long held secrets and shame about things in our past, how much that affects present behavior.
Wow. Okay. Well, I am certainly looking forward to seeing and hearing more about that book. Do you have an expected publishing date?
Nope. It's we are in final round of edits right now, so I'm hoping it'll be relatively soon. Not the 5 years that it was between the Unprotected and Breach, but that's the best I can say. So it shouldn't take that long.
Well, let Bookaholic know when it's released. Have your folks reach out to me and let me know when that hits the shelves. And so, Kelley, thank you so much for joining Bookaholic Podcast today. I know my audience will get a lot out of this, and we will have all of your social media connections, links to your books, the Writing Center, all in the podcast show notes and in the description box on the YouTube channel. Kelley, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Deirdre. It was really wonderful.
Thank you.